My mom said it so casually, like she was talking about rearranging furniture. Your ex and his wife and their kids will move into your house. They need it more. I remember the words hanging in the air, heavy and suffocating, and my chest tightened as if someone had pulled a rope around it. For a moment, I couldn't even process what I had just heard. My house, the place I bought with my own money, the place I worked for, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, fighting through every mortgage payment. The house I came back to after my marriage collapsed, the one safe corner of my world, now being treated like some charity prize my ex was entitled to. I stood there staring at her, waiting for her to laugh, to smirk, to admit it was some kind of cruel joke, but her face stayed perfectly still. She was serious. My own mother had decided that the man who cheated on me, who left me broken and humiliated, somehow deserved to live under my roof with the woman he replaced me with and their children. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just asked her one question. And where exactly am I supposed to go? She blinked like I was being difficult, like I was ruining her perfect little plan. You're single. You don't have kids. You'll be fine. They need stability, they need space, and you've got it. Why can't you be the bigger person? I felt my nails digging into my palms as I clenched my fists, because this wasn't the first time she had asked me to shrink myself so that he could take up more room. Growing up, I was always the one told to compromise, to give in, to be the peacemaker, while my brother and then later my ex were treated like golden boys. When my ex and I divorced, I thought at least that nightmare was over. I thought I could finally breathe. And now here she was, trying to hand him the keys to the only safe place I had left. I thought back to every time he called me too sensitive, when I cried after finding lipstick on his shirt. Every time he made me feel like I was losing my mind when I caught late-night texts from numbers saved without names. Every time he smiled smugly as if I should be grateful just to be his wife. And now that same smug man was going to stretch out on my couch, bring his new wife into my kitchen, tuck his kids into rooms I painted myself? My mother looked at me like I was selfish, like I was the villain for even hesitating. She said, "It's family. We take care of family." I almost laughed, because when did he ever take care of me? When did anyone ever stand up for me? Family, in my world, had always meant me giving, them taking, and me swallowing the hurt in silence. But something in me shifted that day. For the first time, I felt the fire rising in my chest instead of the tears. I looked my mother in the eye and said, "If you think they need a place so badly, they can move into your house. My door is closed." When I was a teenager, I should have realized the pattern. My brother always came first. He was the golden child, the miracle boy who could do no wrong, while I was the one told to compromise, to be understanding, to keep quiet for the sake of peace. He got the new bike when I had to settle for hand-me-downs. He got the celebration dinners when I brought home straight A's and heard only a distracted good job. It planted something in me, a seed of silence, teaching me that my role was to step aside so others could shine. And when I met Daniel, my ex, I carried that same training into our marriage. He saw it, he exploited it, and he knew I would swallow my own discomfort again and again. At first, he charmed everyone. My mother adored him, said he was ambitious, hardworking, a provider. I wanted to believe that too, but it didn't take long for the cracks to show. He controlled the finances, made little comments about how I wouldn't be able to handle things without him, how I was lucky he chose me. The cheating started quietly, with subtle signs, and when I confronted him, he turned it around on me, saying I was paranoid, insecure, imagining things. I remember one night vividly, a strange number calling past midnight, me answering and hearing a woman giggle before hanging up, and Daniel looking at me with that smirk and saying, "You really need help." That was his favorite line, making me question my own sanity while he twisted the truth in plain sight. My mother never believed me. When I tried to confide in her, she'd say, "Men stray, but he's here, isn't he? Focus on keeping your family together." Family, family, family. That was always her refrain, except somehow it never applied to me. When the marriage finally ended, it was messy. He kept most of the savings because the accounts were under his name, but I kept the house. That was my one victory, my one anchor. The place I rebuilt myself brick by brick. I painted the walls. I worked double shifts. I made that house mine. And now, hearing my mother talk about handing it over as if it was nothing but a spare key, I felt my stomach twist. She tried to soften it, saying, "It won't be forever, just until they get back on their feet." But I knew Daniel. I knew his wife. They would never leave once they got comfortable. He'd sit at my table, mock me with those eyes, and I'd be erased in my own space. I stood there thinking back on all the years of shrinking, of bending, of staying quiet. And I realized in that moment I was done. I wasn't the quiet daughter anymore. I wasn't the gaslit wife. I was the woman who had survived all of it. And I wasn't about to hand over my hard-won life to the same man who had once tried to destroy me. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach, because I knew my mother wasn't going to drop it. Sure enough, by noon she called again, her voice already sharpened with guilt-tripping sweetness. "Honey, Daniel and the kids could come by this weekend to take a look at the house, just to see how they'd fit in. Don't be difficult." I felt my throat go dry. Difficult, that word again. The label she'd slapped on me since childhood whenever I resisted. I told her no flat, without excuses. Her silence on the other end felt like a verdict. "You're being selfish," she finally said, her tone low and scolding, like I was 12 again refusing to lend my toys. "You don't understand what it means to sacrifice for family." I wanted to laugh because I had spent my whole life sacrificing for family. And what had it ever given me back? But I didn't laugh. I told her calmly, "If you want to house them, open your door. Mine stays shut." She hung up without another word, and I knew that wasn't the end of it. 2 days later, I came home from work and saw Daniel's car parked down the street, bold as ever. My pulse spiked. I walked inside, and sure enough, he was standing in my kitchen with my mother, sipping coffee like he owned the place. My mother had let him in with her spare key. The sight of him leaning against my counter, the same counter I scrubbed clean after late nights, the same counter where I cried when he left me, made my blood burn. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice shaking but loud. He smirked, that same infuriating smirk, and said, "Relax, we're just talking logistics. This house has plenty of space and the kids will love it here." Like it was already settled. Like I was invisible in my own home. My mother had the audacity to put her hand on my arm and whisper, "Don't make a scene." And in that second, I felt every scene I had never made rise up inside me. Every tear I swallowed. Every insult I buried. Every night I stayed silent while being betrayed. My hands trembled, but I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I walked over to the door, pulled out the spare key she had hidden under the mat for herself, and dropped it in the trash. Then I turned to both of them and said in a voice steadier than I felt, "Get out. Right now. Or I call the police." My mother's face turned pale. Daniel's smirk faltered just slightly, and for the first time in years, I felt the power shift in the room. Daniel didn't move at first. He stood there with his arms crossed, his jaw set, as if daring me to follow through. "You wouldn't," he muttered, his voice low, cocky in the way I remembered too well. I didn't answer him. I just reached for my phone, unlocked it slowly, deliberately, and started dialing. My silence spoke louder than any shouting could. My mother gasped, "Are you crazy? This is family!" But I didn't flinch. I pressed the call button, and only then did Daniel finally grab his jacket off the chair, muttering curses under his breath. "Fine," he spat. "But this isn't over. You'll see." He brushed past me, his shoulder grazing mine, and stormed out the door. My mother lingered for a second, her eyes wide with fury and disbelief. "You'll regret this," she said, shaking her head like I had betrayed her personally. "When you're old and alone, don't come running to me." She slammed the door behind her, and for the first time in years, the house was quiet, truly mine. I sank down onto the couch, my hands still trembling, but beneath the fear was something stronger. Relief, and a spark of defiance that had been buried too long. Still, I knew my mother. I knew Daniel. This wasn't over. They wouldn't give up so easily. Sure enough, within days I started getting calls from relatives, my aunt, my cousin, each one echoing the same script. Your mom said you won't let Daniel and the kids stay with you? How could you be so heartless? They need stability. Don't you remember what it's like for children? It was a coordinated attack, a family smear campaign designed to wear me down. Every time I repeated the same words, "It's my house." The answer is no. Some hung up on me, some sighed dramatically, some told me I was selfish. But for once I didn't bend. I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. At night, though, the silence pressed heavy. I kept replaying the look on Daniel's face, the confidence that he would get his way, the smugness that came from years of being coddled and enabled. And I realized, if I didn't put this in writing, if I didn't make it official, they would find ways to keep pushing, to keep invading, to keep gaslighting me into doubting my own boundaries. So the next morning, I called a lawyer. The lawyer's office smelled like leather and paper, and as I sat across from him, I finally felt like I wasn't fighting alone. I laid it all out: the divorce, the house deed, the harassment, the pressure from my mother. He listened carefully, nodding, and then slid a copy of my title deed across the desk, confirming what I already knew but needed to hear out loud. This property is yours, sole owner. No one, not your mother, not your ex, not anyone, has a legal claim. Those words steadied me in a way nothing else had. He suggested a restraining order if Daniel tried to show up again, and even offered to send a cease and desist letter to my mother if she continued to use her spare key or harass me on his behalf. It sounded so extreme, but then I remembered the sight of Daniel in my kitchen, leaning on my counter, already planning where his kids would sleep like I was just a ghost haunting the background of my own home. No, extreme wasn't the word. Necessary, that was it. When I walked out of that office, the autumn air felt sharper, cleaner, like it was slicing through the fog I'd been drowning in for years. That night, I gathered every single thing in my house that tied back to them. The framed wedding photo tucked in a drawer, the old gifts from my mother meant to make peace, the keys she had left behind. I put them in a box, taped it shut, and drove it straight to her porch. I didn't ring the bell, I didn't knock, I didn't leave a note, just dropped it and walked away. The next day, my phone lit up with messages, missed calls, texts filled with venom. Daniel, you'll regret this. Kids deserve better than a bitter woman like you. My mother. I don't know who you think you are, but this isn't the daughter I raised. Each one felt like a stone hurled at my window, trying to break me open. But the glass held. I ignored them all. And when the silence finally came, when hours passed with no buzzing phone, no pounding guilt in my ear, I realized something shocking. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being called selfish. I was free. Weeks passed, and for a while I let myself believe maybe they had finally backed off. I settled into my routines again. Morning coffee on the porch, late evenings reading by the lamp, the small rituals that made the house feel safe and mine. But then one Friday evening, as I pulled into the driveway after work, my headlights caught something that made my stomach drop. Boxes stacked by the curb. Not mine, Daniel's. And there he was, standing on the sidewalk with his wife and their 2 kids, acting like this was already his address. My mother's car was parked right behind them. She stood there with her arms folded, watching me like a warden waiting for a prisoner to comply. My pulse roared in my ears. I stepped out of my car, keys still clutched in my hand like a weapon, and walked straight up the path. "What is this?" I asked, my voice cold, flat. Daniel smirked, the same smirk that haunted me through our entire marriage. "We're moving in. Mom said you'd come around eventually. Guess we'll just help speed the process." His wife stood awkwardly behind him, clutching one of the kids' hands, avoiding my eyes. My mother stepped forward, her voice syrupy but hard underneath. "It's happening, honey. Stop fighting. They need this more than you." Something inside me cracked, not in a way that broke me, but in a way that let the light in. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and before they could follow, I slammed it shut and threw the deadbolt. My mother started pounding immediately. "Open this door! Don't embarrass yourself in front of the children." Daniel's voice bellowed through the wood. "This is ridiculous. I'll get my lawyer. You don't get to keep us out forever." My hands were shaking, but I didn't yell back. I went to the kitchen, picked up my phone, and dialed. When the dispatcher answered, I said calmly, "This is my home. My ex-husband and my mother are trying to force their way in. I need officers here now." 10 minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights lit up my street, and as the neighbors peeked through their blinds, I watched from my window as 2 officers stepped between me and the people who had spent years convincing me I had no right to boundaries. For the first time, it wasn't just me standing alone, it was the law on my side. And the look on Daniel's face when the officer told him to take his boxes and leave, that smirk finally cracked into something I'd been waiting years to see. Panic. Daniel tried to argue, of course. He puffed up his chest and told the officers I was confused, that the house was practically his since the kids need it. He even waved his arms like he was the victim, pointing at me through the window as though I were the unreasonable one. But the officers weren't moved. One of them asked him plainly, "Do you have your name on the deed? Any lease? Any documentation at all?" Daniel's mouth opened, then closed again. He glanced at my mother, desperate for backup, but she looked just as powerless in that moment. "She's my daughter," she tried, her voice brittle, "and this is a family matter." "You can't just—" The officer cut her off. "Ma'am, your daughter is the legal homeowner. You have no right to enter without permission. If you continue to harass her, we can cite you for trespassing." My mother's face turned red, a mixture of rage and humiliation. And for once, she had no rehearsed line, no guilt-drenched lecture to throw at me. Daniel, though, wasn't ready to let go. He leaned down, grabbed one of the boxes, and tried to muscle his way back toward the porch. That's when the second officer stepped forward, hand on his belt, and said firmly, "Sir, you need to leave, now." Watching it unfold, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. For years, I had been the one told to step aside, to quiet down, to make room for them. And here, in the glow of police lights, I saw the opposite. Authority telling them to back off, to respect the boundaries I'd finally drawn. Daniel's wife tugged his arm, whispering something sharp, and reluctantly he picked up the boxes and began shoving them back into his car. My mother called my name once more, a desperate edge in her tone. "You're making a mistake. You'll regret this when you're alone." I didn't answer. I just stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching them pack up every last trace of their invasion. When the cars finally pulled away, leaving only silence and the faint smell of exhaust behind, the officer turned to me and asked gently, "Do you want to press charges?" I shook my head, not yet, though every nerve in me screamed that this wasn't over. But I also knew something had shifted forever. They could no longer pretend my house, my life, or my peace belonged to them. It was mine, and now the world had seen it too. The weekend after that showdown, the phone calls started again, but this time they weren't just from relatives. They came from Daniel himself. Long rants and voicemails dripping with threats wrapped in fake concern. "You think you won this? Courts don't like bitter ex-wives. When the kids grow up without stability, that's on you." He said things like that over and over, as if repeating them would make them true. My mother left her own messages too, quieter but more poisonous. "You've embarrassed me. Everyone in the family is talking. You made your brother ashamed to show his face at work. You've ruined our name." I listened to each message once, then saved them. Every cruel word, every manipulation, I wanted it all on record. By Tuesday, I was back in my lawyer's office, sliding my phone across the desk. He scrolled through the voicemails, expression hardening with each one. "This," he said finally, "is harassment. We'll file for a protective order, and if they keep this up, we'll press charges." It was strange how calm I felt sitting there, hearing those words. A year ago, I would have been sobbing, terrified of the fallout, of being labeled dramatic. But now I just nodded, steady, like I had already decided. I was done living in fear of them. That night I changed the locks again, this time with reinforced deadbolts. I installed security cameras that blinked red at the edges of my porch. For the first time, I felt the walls of my house wrap around me like armor instead of a cage. And yet deep down, I knew Daniel wasn't finished. Men like him didn't just slink away when the game was over. They looked for new angles, new ways to twist the knife. And sure enough, the next blow came where I least expected it. Not at my front door, not on my phone, but at my job. One Thursday morning, my boss called me into his office with a strange look. He slid a manila envelope across the desk. Inside were screenshots, emails supposedly from me, filled with cruel words about my coworkers, mocking clients, even threatening to quit. All faked, all sent from an account made to look like mine. At the bottom of the last page, my stomach dropped when I saw the signature, Danielle. A name Daniel used to tease me with, twisting my own into something petty. My boss was sympathetic, but firm. "We know this isn't you, but someone is trying very hard to ruin your reputation. Handle it quickly, or it could cost you here." As I walked out of his office, clutching that envelope, a chill ran through me. Daniel wasn't just trying to steal my home anymore. He wanted to erase my stability, piece by piece, until I had nothing left. And for the first time, I felt a surge of cold clarity. If he wanted war, he had finally found it. I spent that entire night at my kitchen table, the envelope of fake emails spread out like evidence in a trial. Every sentence dripped with his fingerprints, the phrasing, the little digs he used to say to me when no one else was listening, the smug way he'd weaponize my own words. I forwarded everything to my lawyer, and within hours he had looped in a cyber investigator. It turned out Daniel wasn't as clever as he thought. The IP addresses from the fake account traced back to his workplace computer and even his home Wi-Fi. By the end of the week, my lawyer had built a case file thicker than my old wedding album. Screenshots, voicemails, timestamps, sworn statements. It was airtight, and when he handed me a copy, he said, "This isn't just harassment anymore. This is defamation, and it's criminal." For once, I wasn't the one on the defensive. Daniel was. But my mother? She refused to see it. She showed up on my porch one evening, pounding on the door until I opened it, her face flushed with rage. "How dare you drag the police into this? How dare you try to ruin his career? He's the father of children. He's family." She spat the word like it was supposed to mean something sacred, but to me, it sounded hollow. I looked at her and said the words I'd been holding back for decades. "Family doesn't mean I set myself on fire to keep you all warm." Her mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. She wasn't used to me pushing back. She stormed off without another word, but I knew she'd run straight to Daniel, tell him everything she could, fuel his anger even more. Fine, let her. Because this time I had more than boundaries. I had proof, lawyers, the law itself. The following Monday, Daniel was served at his office. Harassment, defamation, attempted identity fraud. My lawyer made sure it was public enough that whispers spread through his workplace before he could spin his story. For years, he had smirked while making me look like the unstable one. Now, standing in front of his coworkers with a court summons in his hand, it was his turn to burn under the spotlight. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt dangerous. Court dates move slowly, but gossip moves fast. Within a week of Daniel being served, I started hearing through old mutual friends that his shiny reputation at work was crumbling. The man who once strutted around bragging about promotions was now whispered about in break rooms. His boss had pulled him off client accounts, pending investigation. His wife, the woman he left me for, showed up at my job one afternoon, eyes red, makeup smudged, clutching her purse like it was the only thing holding her together. She didn't even ask to sit down. She just blurted, "Did you have to do this? You're destroying our lives." I stared at her, stunned by the audacity, and finally said, "No, he destroyed them himself. I'm just done covering for him." Her mouth trembled, but she had no response, because deep down she knew it was true. Meanwhile, my mother doubled down. She called relatives near and far, spinning the story that I was vindictive, that I wanted revenge because I couldn't move on. At family gatherings I wasn't invited to, she painted me as the cold-hearted daughter who turned against her own blood. I braced myself for the shame, for the familiar ache of exclusion. But when the texts came, quiet messages from cousins and even an uncle, I realized something shocking. They weren't all against me. Some wrote, "We believe you. We've seen how she favors him. We always wondered why you stayed quiet." For the first time, cracks were forming in the perfect mask my mother had worn for years. By the time the preliminary hearing rolled around, I walked into the courthouse not as the shaky, silenced woman Daniel thought he could bully, but as someone carrying a binder of evidence and a spine made of steel. Daniel sat across from me at the long table, his smirk gone, his jaw tight, his lawyer whispering frantically in his ear. My mother sat behind him, arms crossed, glaring at me like I had personally betrayed her kingdom. When the judge asked Daniel's lawyer to explain the origin of the emails traced back to his IP address, the silence in the room was deafening. He had no excuse. No smirk could save him now. And as the judge set the trial date, I caught Daniel's eyes across the courtroom. For the first time in our entire history, I saw fear there. Real, raw fear. And in that moment, I knew. The house, my peace, my freedom. They were never his to take. They were mine all along. The weeks leading up to trial felt like living in two parallel worlds. By day, I went to work, paid my bills, drank my morning coffee on the porch like any other woman reclaiming her life. But by night, I sifted through evidence, meeting with my lawyer, preparing myself for every angle Daniel might try to twist. He filed motions, desperate attempts to delay, to dismiss, to paint me as unstable. Each one crumbled under the weight of facts. The IP addresses, the voicemails, the testimonies from neighbors who had seen him on my porch with boxes, trying to force his way in. And yet my mother kept calling, her voice hoarse from repeating the same script. "Drop this before it destroys him. He's the father of children. He's family. Don't you care what people will say about us?" Us. Always us. Never me. I stopped answering. I stopped explaining. I let her words go to voicemail, one after another, because I was done defending my right to breathe. The day of trial, I walked into the courthouse in a navy dress I had chosen carefully. Professional, sharp, mine. Daniel was already there, sitting stiffly beside his lawyer, his wife hovering a few rows back, looking like she hadn't slept in days. My mother was there too, arms crossed, glaring at me with that familiar mixture of disappointment and rage. The testimony was brutal. My lawyer laid out every piece of evidence like bricks building a wall around me. The emails traced directly to Daniel's accounts, the neighbors' statements, the recordings of his threats. One by one, the pieces stacked higher, until Daniel's carefully crafted image was buried beneath them. His lawyer tried to argue I was vindictive, that I wanted revenge. But the judge interrupted, voice steady. "What I see is a clear documented pattern of harassment. The defendant's actions are not only malicious, they are illegal. Indeed." That moment, I felt something loosen in my chest, like chains I hadn't even realized were still wrapped around me. When the judge granted a restraining order and ruled in favor of damages, Daniel's face drained of color. He glanced back at my mother, desperate, but for once even she had no words. The gavel came down, sharp and final, and just like that, the balance shifted forever. I walked out of that courtroom not as the daughter who always gave in, not as the wife who was gaslit into silence, but as the woman who had stood her ground against both of them, and won. In the days after the verdict, the silence was almost unnerving. For years my life had been filled with their voices, my mother's sharp reprimands, Daniel's mocking smirk woven into every word. Now there was nothing but quiet. At first I braced myself for the backlash, expecting them to find another angle, another scheme. But then the news spread. Word of Daniel's conviction rippled through his workplace, his neighborhood, even our extended family. The man who once strutted through life untouchable was suddenly the subject of whispers, pity, and disgust. His wife filed for separation within a month. I heard through a cousin that she told him point blank, "I didn't sign up for this mess. I didn't marry you to fight your ex-wife in court." And just like that, the picture-perfect replacement he left me for walked out the door, leaving him to choke on his own ruin. My mother, on the other hand, doubled down. She called relatives, claiming I had orchestrated everything to destroy Daniel, that I had manipulated the court, that she was the real victim of my betrayal. But her words didn't land the way they used to. Family members who had stayed silent began to question her. An aunt texted me late one night, "I should have spoken up years ago. I see now what you were living with. I'm sorry." That apology, small as it was, felt heavier than gold. My house, once a battleground, slowly became a sanctuary again. I changed the curtains, painted the front door a bold red, planted flowers out front that burst into color against the brick. Neighbors stopped by to compliment the change, and I realized they had seen more than I thought. They had watched me fight for my space, my dignity, and they respected me for it. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the window and almost not recognize the woman staring back. She looked steady, strong, unapologetic. And though I knew the scars from years of being silenced would never vanish, I also knew this. I would never, ever let them chain me again. My mother stopped calling eventually, perhaps realizing her grip on me had finally snapped. And Daniel? The last I heard, he moved 2 towns over, working a job far beneath the one he lost, his name stained beyond repair. For once, his downfall wasn't my burden to carry. It was his alone. One evening, months later, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, the sun dipping low and casting the sky in shades of orange and violet. For the first time in years, I felt peace stretch out across my chest instead of tension. My phone buzzed, and when I glanced at it, I saw a message from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It was Daniel. "You think you won, but you ruined my life. I hope you're proud of yourself." I stared at the words, waiting for the old panic to rise, the racing heart, the nausea, the fear that somehow he still had power over me. But instead, I felt nothing but clarity. I deleted the message, blocked the number, and set the phone face down. That simple act felt like the final door slamming shut. The war was over and he had lost. A week later, I received an envelope in the mail from the court, the official copy of the judgment, stamped and signed. Restraining order in place, damages awarded, his name inked on the pages of his own downfall. I slipped it into a folder labeled Proof and tucked it away in my drawer, not because I needed the reminder, but because it felt like a trophy, evidence of the woman I had become. My mother didn't show up at my door again. She tried, through relatives, to pull me back into her orbit, but I didn't budge. The more distance I put between us, the clearer I saw it. She wasn't protecting Daniel because he was family. She was protecting him because to admit what he had done, to admit how she had enabled him, would mean facing her own failures. And she would rather lose me than face herself. That realization hurt, but it also freed me. I didn't need her approval anymore. I didn't need her voice in my head telling me to shrink. I had built a life without them, and it was finally mine. Some nights I still think about the girl I used to be. The one who bent, who stayed silent, who cried into her pillow and begged for scraps of kindness. I want to reach back through time and tell her, hold on. One day you'll stand in the same house they tried to take from you, and you'll realize you were stronger than all of them combined. And sitting there on my porch, the air cool and the world quiet, I whispered it out loud, as if she could hear me. I won't burn myself to keep anyone warm again. The seasons shifted, and with them, so did the rhythm of my life. The house that once echoed with the weight of threats and arguments began to breathe with laughter again, my laughter. I hosted a few close friends for dinner, something I hadn't dared to do in years. We sat around the table with candles lit, wine glasses clinking, and I caught myself smiling without effort, the kind of smile that comes from safety. At work, my boss pulled me aside one morning and said, "You've handled everything with more grace than I can imagine. We're glad to have you here." A year ago, I thought I might lose that job because of Daniel's lies. Now I was being offered a promotion, proof that no matter how hard he tried to sabotage me, I'd rebuilt stronger. One evening, I drove past my mother's neighborhood, more out of curiosity than longing. Her lights were on, but I didn't stop. I realized I no longer felt the pull to fix things, to beg for scraps of her affection. The bond between us had been severed not by my choice, but by her insistence on siding with the man who destroyed me. And for the first time, I was okay with letting it stay broken. Daniel's shadow still lingered in town gossip. I heard from a former co-worker of his that he was working shifts at a job that barely covered rent. His name whispered like a cautionary tale. The man who once strutted with arrogance was now described as bitter, defeated, alone. His downfall wasn't loud or dramatic. It was slow, steady, humiliating. And I didn't have to lift a finger. Life did the work for me. One night, sitting in the quiet of my living room, I pulled out the folder with all the court documents. I flipped through them slowly. The restraining order, the damages awarded, the cease and desist letters. Each page felt like a stone I'd carried for years, now finally set down. I closed the folder, placed it back in the drawer, and this time I didn't feel like I was clutching evidence for survival. I felt like I was holding the chapters of a book I had already finished. The story of being silenced, erased, gaslit, that story was over. The new one was just beginning. And as I turned off the light and let the house settle into its nighttime quiet, I realized something with a certainty so deep it anchored me. They could no longer touch me. Not my mother, not Daniel, not anyone. My life belonged to me alone. The months that followed felt less like recovery and more like renovation, not just of the house, but of myself. Every creak and paint stroke a small ceremony of reclamation. I stopped avoiding mirrors and started repairing things around the place I had left to rot while I was busy surviving someone else's story. I refinished the porch railings, rehung the light fixture over the kitchen island, bought new bedding that felt like permission. Friends I'd pushed away for fear of drama came back, tentative at first, then with casseroles and wine and the kind of steady affection that doesn't demand anything in return. I began keeping a late evening journal, just 5 minutes of truth on paper, and it surprised me how quickly the entries stopped reading like memorials to pain and started sounding like plans. I enrolled in that night class on small business accounting. I'd always been too scared to try, partly because the work of learning numbers felt like building a new spine, and partly because I wanted to know my finances inside out, in case anyone ever tried to weaponize them again. The promotion at work finally came through, and with it a raise that let me breathe without counting quarters. I used part of that bonus to pay off a lingering chunk of the mortgage so my house was less a ledger of struggle and more a fortress of choice. People started to knock on my door for reasons that weren't family drama. Neighbors asking for baked goods, a young woman from work asking if she could borrow a set of my presentation slides, an old friend asking if I wanted to host a book club. I said yes to all of it. Saying yes for me felt different now. It wasn't about buying affection or proving I was nice. It was about creating life that fit me. There were awkward moments I hadn't expected. My mother texted me on a Tuesday, short and venomous, asking if I'd come to a family dinner to make amends. I typed back a single sentence and left it. I'm not the one who needs fixing. She sent a string of angry messages after that, and then nothing for weeks. When she finally called, months later, it was to ask a practical question, something small about a tax document, and I answered with the same calm I carried into the courtroom, factual and cool. The crisis had burned through whatever illusions she'd had about loyalty. Her priorities were clear, and I accepted them as such. Daniel's name stopped surfacing in the kitchens of mutual acquaintances, except as an example of what happens when you hurt people and refuse to look in the mirror. He tried once to contact me through a mutual friend, blunt, embarrassed, pleading, and the friend forwarded the message without comment. I deleted it unread. In the quiet hours, when the house settled and the old ghosts pressed at the windows, I would sometimes open the folder with the court papers, trace the stamped signature with my finger, and feel a thrum of something like triumph. But it was gentler now, not a trophy to parade, but a ledger closed. I used the money from the damages not to spite him, but to create distance. I set up a scholarship with a local women's shelter for classes that taught financial literacy, donated to the legal aid fund that had helped a neighbor take action in a custody dispute, and paid for a few months of counseling for a single mother who worked nights at the diner down the street. The irony was delicious. Those who had taught me to hide my wounds now had to watch me hand the bandages back to others. People noticed. The aunt who'd whispered condolences in private began showing up at my dinners with a potato salad and a small apology. "You were brave," she said once, and I didn't argue. Bravery is a mirror that shows itself only when someone else names it. I met someone slowly, not with fireworks and rescues, but with coffee and long conversations about books and the way he loved gardening as much as I did. He didn't erase the past. He folded his life into the present with patient humor and small acts, fixing a leaky gutter, learning my coffee order, listening when I spoke about court motions like they were old wounds that had finally grown over. We never rushed the word love. Instead, we built the softer, sturdier architecture of partnership, mutual respect, shared chores, the kind of quiet reliability I'd been taught not to expect. On the anniversary of the day my mother told me they would move in, I stood in my kitchen and laughed out loud, sharp and clean. Not the hysterical laugh of someone buffeted by others' wills, but the clear, astonished laugh of a woman who had found her voice and kept it. I didn't gloat. I made lasagna, invited friends, and left one empty chair at the table for the daughter I used to be, an acknowledgement that she'd survived and that survival had become something more than endurance. Late that night, after everyone went home, I walked the house slowly, touching the banister, flipping off lights, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator. The trophies of that old life, photos, keepsakes, the faint smell of a perfume I once wore to please someone else, were gone or boxed and given away to people who would use them without the baggage. In their place were plants that thrived on sunlight, art I'd picked because it made my chest lift, a thick rug I'd saved up for that finally tied the living room together. I knew scars would remain. Memory is a stubborn thing, but the fear that used to wake me in the small hours had been replaced by a different kind of vigilance, one that felt like agency. If anyone tried to take my peace again, I would answer not with silence, but with law, with friends, with community. The final act of revenge wasn't in ruining Daniel or shaming my mother. It was in making my life so undeniably, deliciously mine that their choices, no matter how loud, couldn't reach it.